Well, I think Lucy San said it so well. You know, the film is really of its time, but what's so startling when you watch Midnight Cowboy is how it resonates today. You know, it really holds up in a way that most films of that time really don't.
Don't. How many times have you watched it all the way through in the last couple of years?
Talking about Midnight Cowboy, not my
Yes.
film. That's 1,000
Not your
times. A few times. But interestingly, when we decided to make this film, I hadn't seen it for a while, but I didn't doubt that it would resonate. I remembered it, having seen it years earlier, and when we started talking about it, everybody responded. Everybody talked about how it was such a touchstone for their lives. They could remember where they saw it. They could remember what they were wearing when they saw it. They could remember themes in it. So I think we had very little doubt that this would work. And, you know, I'm curious about how the audience feels, but we're not showing all this film. I mean, we show bits and pieces of it, but I don't know if you had to have seen this film recently to get what we're doing here. I don't know how people feel about that.
I got it, and I hadn't seen it since it came out, so it was a while. As documentary filmmakers, we rely on the people we interview, and especially in films that don't have narration, we rely on their passions to help us tell the story. Tell us about those people. I guess they were fairly obvious who you wanted to get. How long were your interviews? How, you know?
It all happened so organically. I mean, it was a week and a half in New York with the New Yorkers and a week or just maybe 3 or 4 days in California. It was very quick. What I didn't know is how personally and how intimately they would get into the interviews. I don't think, and Susan has to back me up on this because I think she agrees with me, they don't feel like talking heads. You know, I feel like they're personally invested in this movie and in the subject, and you feel their personalities come out. So, you know,
Did John Voight have to check you out, or did he just go, yeehaw?
He was a little hesitant. He wasn't sure. But once we got into the conversation, it was very easy, and he was amazingly charming and forthcoming.
And part of that intimacy is the relationship that you have with Rex Miller, our DP. You know, you've worked with him on, you know, The Rape of Reese Taylor and Crime on the Bayou, the previous films. And, you know, you have this language with him and this understanding, and his close-ups and framing of the shots, you know, is really... And I think that it's different in your films, very much different in the way that you direct him as a DP, and very beautiful.
And the other person I think that also adds to that is our editor, Anthony Rapoli, who I've worked with also for 3 or 4 films. And we have a shorthand, and, you know, we're in the edit together all the time. And, you know, Susan and Simon then come into it every once in a while. But there's a kind of understanding, and it happens... I wouldn't say that we work quickly, but I would say that we work intuitively together. So
was the choice to do extreme close-ups in the edit a choice right from the beginning? Did you have to play with that?
No, it was
arm wrestle.
No arm wrestling. It was pretty clear to us that that's what was working. I mean, when we would move back, we had another camera which was back further, and whenever we went back to that camera, it just didn't work.
Wow. So how long was each interview? I mean, some people, I interview for an hour and I feel like my subjects get tired. Some people interview for 4 or 5 hours and I can't believe it.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between. Good. Some questions from the audience. Yes, sir. Speak up.
Presumably you tried to contact Dustin Hoffman and he didn't participate.
He wasn't available. Yeah. He's been an advisor of mine for a number of years.
Great. Yes, sir.
John Voight's politics are very non-Sag Harbor. Did that at all come up, or it just was like irrelevant?
It didn't come up, actually. He references it a little bit in the film, and Jennifer Salt, I love when she says, it's very ironic because John Voight was so interested in Abby Hoffman in those days. So, those of us who know where John Voight stands today can appreciate the humor in that. But it never did come up.
I would have liked to see them have more interaction with the war.
That's your film to make then, I guess.
Thank you.
Another?
Understood about it. Did they want to go in it or did they want to fight it?
I think they actually answered that in the film.
They do, but briefly. You don't see.
I want to say the opposite. I feel like,
Bundy.
hi, I just want to say congratulations. I think it's such an incredible, just flowing, almost symphony with the music and the interplay of the archival, and then the way you weave Midnight Cowboy in with everything that's going on in the 60s, and fluidly go back and forth from the assassination of the Kennedys to Vietnam, the lack of trust, and the loss of trust, the role of youth, and really do make a case for the timelessness of the film, like, and make it in such an emotional, contextualized manner. I mean, it's really an incredible feat, I think. So, just wanted to-
Thank you.
There's a question.
Is Adam Holliday here?
No, he's not.
Yes.
How long did it take you, and could you tell us a little bit about what the budget was like?
How long did it take, and can you?
Clearance of footage, the amount of, how many?
Well, actually, I'll
Let me
jump in right.
repeat the question. How long did it take, and what was the budget? Because clearly there was a lot of
Yeah.
archival.
The answer is that
stuff.
we haven't actually met the budget yet. So believe it or not, we're still trying to, raise money for it. And we're
Which is why we invited you here today.
right. None of you leave without making it. No kidding. But it's close to $1 million, and the archival footage is very expensive, as you can imagine, as is the music. Some of it is fair use, so that's a technical conversation to have at another time. But some of it you can reduce the overhead by some fair use.
Are you trying to do favored nations for the?
Yes.
Yeah, favored nations means that everybody gets exactly the same amount. And if you have a clip from a film that lost money and made nothing and no one's ever seen, they still get the same amount as Marlon Brando's clip, which may be favored nations, but who knows?
Can help to really keep the cost down.
Costs
or
that,
put them up. Right?
depending on
Double-edged
how many
sword,
you
yeah.
have. Yes.
I have two questions. I may have just missed this. Who is Lucy in a broader sense in this?
Lucy Sant is a cultural critic, and she wrote a book called Low Life, which was a very
That I know.
right. So she's a pretty well respected, and maybe you know her before she transitioned. Her name was Luke Sant. So that might explain some confusion.
When Low Life was published, it was she published it.
She was
it
identifying
was identified as
as
Luke.
Luke.
But I wasn't sure, what the connection was in terms of this subject matter of Schlesinger and
Well, I mean, again, there were so many things that were woven into this story, so it wasn't necessarily about Schlesinger as such. It really was about people that lived on the edge, people that were living on the bottom of the ladder. That's really what we were addressing through Lucy.
Yeah. And did I see 4 researchers in the credits? So, which is kind of unusual. That's a lot. You really did a lot of research.
I don't think it is unusual anymore. It's not
Okay.
We
unusual.
had a lot of archival, so
You have
Yeah.
a lot of archival. A lot of archival.
Yeah.
Sir, one more.
In watching this, I had predominant feelings of fear, aggression, and maybe compassion. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the transformation. Because the 60s is like today, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much. You said that. So is there any kind of transformative something in your film? Give us hope.
I think there's concern about the way we are, very much like the 60s. I think one of the themes that I was hoping would be brought out towards the end of the film, which would become more and more apparent, is that we're living in a period where there's still a lot of economic disparity and there's a lot of homelessness. And when we hear Fred Neil's version of Everybody's Talk, and I don't know if you guys caught that, but you know, Fred Neil wrote Everybody's Talk, and it was recorded by Nielsen for the film. So we hear both versions in this film. And when we hear the Fred Neil version, we're watching a montage of homeless people in New York, which was during that period of time. It's, you know, back in the 60s and 70s. And then we see some contemporary photographs taken by Adam Hollander, the cinematographer of Midnight Cowboy. And
Who lives on the East End.
yes, and we wanted very much for us to kind of weave all of that together, that we would understand that, you know, that maybe, as Jennifer Salt says, that we haven't come far enough.
We have time for one more question. Sir, in the back.
At the very end, the shot of,
I can't hear you.
at the very end, the shot of the John Boyd character with his arm around Dustin Hoffman. Hoffman, I think, is dying at that point.
That's right.
It's interspersed with a shot from the Vietnam War. What was the purpose of that?
Well, we had been weaving Vietnam through the story all along, and I think that what we were trying to remind people of is that what John Schlesinger says is that this film is really about compassion. And with all the other political things surrounding the war, there was also a bonding that took place, always does during wartime. And we see, you know, a black man reaching out to a white man who's obviously suffering and, you know, kind of holding on for dear life. And we're going to watch, we have just seen Dustin Hoffman die, and the way that John Voight is redeemed as a character and becomes noble is the way he's taken care of his friend. So, you know, it may be a little bit obvious to some people and may not be obvious enough to others, but that was what I was trying for. It's also an iconic photograph taken by Larry Burroughs. It's always been a favorite of mine. So,
Thank you so much for bringing your film.
thank you.